we are seeing these reports that Israel has started a ground offensive. Is that true?
I have no information that Israel has started a ground offensive. No, not at this point.
An hour and a half ago, the Israeli Defence Forces, via their Twitter account, said IDF air and ground troops are currently attacking in the Gaza Strip. Would that be incorrect, or are we losing some kind of clarity here about what's going on?
I think that tweet is a misunderstood tweet. I know the comment that you're talking about, and I think that what we're talking about here is ground forces on the edge of Gaza that are tanks and artillery that are taking part in the fighting, as opposed to having crossed the border.
Okay, so we're also seeing some reports that there are troops moving in from the north, bombing first, then entering with tanks. But as it stands this morning, you do not have that information.
Correct.
What is the situation on the border as you understand it now?
Well, as it is at the moment, over the last 3 days, we've witnessed Hamas fire nearly 1,800 rockets into Israeli towns and cities, indiscriminately, firing on our capital, Jerusalem, firing at our major cities, and attacking, indiscriminately and attacking civilians. Unfortunately, 8 civilians have been killed. And hundreds of others have been wounded, and approximately 300 of the rockets have actually fallen inside the Gaza Strip. And we've received significant reports that we believe that a number of Palestinians have been killed and certainly injured by these Hamas rockets. So what we've really seen is an attempt by the Islamist terror organization Hamas to fire rockets on Israel indiscriminately.
Mr. Freeman, how would you justify a ground invasion? At what point would that line have been crossed? For us, it's about stopping the rockets. You have to understand that Hamas, this Islamist terror organization who are based in Gaza, have launched this violence, this really unprovoked violence, because they are determined, ever since they were founded in the 1980s, they have one goal in mind, and that is the destruction of the state of Israel and the death of all the Jews within the state of Israel. And they're doing everything within their power to do that. And we, like any other country, there's no country in the world that would accept 1,800 rockets and missiles fired on its population. And therefore, we will do what's necessary in order to defend our citizens and to stop those rockets coming in. Mr. Freeman, let's go to the origins of this current intifada that we're seeing, because there are reports that Israel deliberately provoked Palestinians at the beginning of Ramadan, curtailing their freedom of movement at the third most holy site.
Well, throughout Ramadan, I would say that's the exact opposite is true. That throughout Ramadan, between 80 and 100,000 Muslims were able to pray on the Temple Mount every single day during Ramadan. We guarantee the freedom of worship and the freedom of religion to all of the religions within Jerusalem. And actually, we took a number of steps to de-escalate the situation, including rerouting the Jerusalem Day Parade, including delaying a court case that was going on, including banning Jews from going up to the Temple Mount, which is the holiest site in Judaism, and taking a number of steps to de-escalate the situation and for calling for calm. And Hamas were determined to escalate the situation. And so we saw this take on the actions that they took. For Hamas, this was just this week's convenience excuse. Hamas always just have any excuse and any reason in order to launch attacks on Israel, because that's their raison d'etre.
Mr. Freeman, for years now, settlements has been the most provocative move that Israel has made. Those have continued, haven't they?
Sorry?
Israeli settlements is always very provocative, particularly in the West Bank, and that has continued. Has that got anything to do with the latest outbreak?
The issue of Jewish communities and settlements has really nothing to do with this. You have to remember that in 2005, Israel withdrew every single settler and every single settlement from the Gaza Strip. So you would expect, if settlements were the issue, the most peaceful border that Israel would have would be with Gaza, because after all, there are now no settlements, no settlers, none inside the Gaza Strip. So there is absolutely no reason whatsoever, if settlements are the issue, for them to be firing and for them to be attacking Israel. So it's clear, just
from the very fact that there are no settlements there. This is not the issue. This is, again, another excuse that Hamas are using. The reason for this violence is pure and simple. Hamas, as an Islamist terrorist organization, since it was founded in the 1980s, has one key aim, and that is to destroy the state of Israel.
Almost 100 people have been killed in Gaza, sadly also around 8 in Israel. How do you see that? How should we see that, those comparing death tolls?
Well, every death is a tragedy. And I think that and in war, there are no real winners in any war. And so that's obvious for everybody. We have to understand that the reason for the death toll is from the Israeli side because Hamas are firing rockets, and also from the Palestinian side. Firstly, a number of those who have been killed are terrorists, as Hamas themselves have admitted. A significant number of those people, if not the vast majority, are terrorists. And the others are because Hamas, either they have been killed by Hamas rockets, and we certainly don't know the exact numbers that have been killed by Hamas rockets that have fallen inside Gaza, but we know that a number of rockets have fallen inside Gaza. And the others are because Hamas placed their rockets inside civilian buildings. Anybody, reporter or anybody who's in Gaza, will be able to see that the rockets that are being fired from houses, they're being fired from next to schools, they're being fired from next to hospitals. That's what Hamas does. They embed themselves in with the civilian population. They admit it themselves. Hamas are carrying out a double war crime. They are firing from within civilian populations, and they are firing at civilian populations.
Is it necessary for Israel to launch as many military strikes and missile strikes as it has done in recent days, given it is protected largely by the Iron Dome?
Well, we are protected by the Iron Dome, and the Iron Dome, I think, also saves Palestinian lives. If you imagine that of the 1,800 rockets, approximately 90% have been shot down by the Iron Dome. If all of those rockets had hit their targets and had hit civilians, and we can only imagine what the death toll would be inside Israel. And with a death toll like that, like in any country, the response would be much more significant. But Israel is doing everything we can to avoid civilian casualties. We're taking extraordinary care. We are notifying people in the buildings and around buildings before we strike them, before we take out the missiles and the missile silos that are there. And we're doing everything we can. So I think that at this point, the question would be that what country and how would any country react? Imagine if hundreds and thousands of rockets were falling on Canberra, if thousands of rockets were falling on Sydney, how you would react and what you would do about it. You would make sure that you protected your population, that you did what you needed to do, and you struck the terrorist infrastructure that were firing those rockets. So we're doing everything we need to do, and we're being very careful and very pinpoint in order to make sure that we protect our citizens and defend ourselves.
Mr. Freeman, a ground offensive from Israel into Gaza has not happened in 16 years, but it does look like if it hasn't happened already, it is about to happen. Is that your read of the situation? I know there was a plan being put to Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, and we've seen those tweets from the Israeli Defence Force. What is your read of what is happening at the moment?
Well, I'm obviously not going to comment on exactly what's happening or not happening or what our plans may or may not be. I can certainly tell you what's going on at the moment. And at the moment, there, as far as I'm aware, there is no ground offensive. But we will do what we need to do in order to protect our civilians. And you say that there hasn't been a ground offensive in Gaza for 16 years. There haven't been this number of rockets in this intense time frame ever. We've never seen 1,800 rockets in the space of 48 hours fired into Israeli civilians and population. At this moment, there are millions of Israelis huddling in bomb shelters because the rockets haven't stopped. And therefore, we will do what we need to do to stop those rockets from landing on Israeli populations, from landing on Israeli civilians, and from killing. This evening, an 87-year-old woman unfortunately died when she was running towards the bomb shelter, and she tripped over and she hit her head and she died. Yesterday, we saw a 5-year-old boy who was killed in his bed when a rocket came through the window in his secure room and killed him while he was sleeping. So we will do what we need to do to stop these terrible things happening.
The world is concerned, Mr. Freeman, that this is looking like all-out war. It's very close to it.
I don't think this is us attempting to stop the rockets. This is very simple to stop. If Hamas stopped firing the rockets, if Hamas immediately stop the provocations, if they stop the incitement, if they stop doing what the attacks on us, then this will end. We have to. We did everything we could to de-escalate and to avoid this situation, everything in our power, and it was Hamas that seemed to be hell-bent and determined to launch this offensive and to launch their attacks against Israel. And therefore, we need to make sure that they don't do that again. You know, if this were to suddenly stop now, but Hamas said, well, we're going to stop for a day or two, and then a week later they started firing the rockets again, that wouldn't be a good situation for anybody. So we need to make sure that when this fighting stops, that when Hamas stop firing the rockets, that they will stop doing so for a very long time indeed, because that is in everybody's interest, including Israeli civilians and including Palestinians.
Okay, from Israel's Foreign Affairs Ministry Policy Advisor, Michael Freeman, thanks so much for your time.